Okay, thank you. Um, I'm going to try and give a bit of context of the bigger picture. And I guess the first thing I want to share is that Latin America is a hotspot of oil and gas exploration and development. Since 2020, over 359,000 square kilometers of acreage were opened for oil and gas exploration on the continent, and that's an area larger than Germany. In 2021, the International Energy Agency's report came out making clear that there's no need for the development of new upstream oil and gas resources. And in fact, the development of further oil and gas field fields endangers our ability to reach net zero by 2050. Oil and gas companies are, however, not bothered by these warnings. And over the past 3 years, they have spent 6.2 billion US dollars exploring for new oil and gas fields in Brazil alone. The top players here are Petrobras, BP, Shell, Total Energies, and Chevron. Now, in the upcoming June 17th auction, Brazil plans to open another 145,000 square kilometers for further oil and gas exploration. And over 1/4 of the offered oil and gas blocks are in the mouth of the Amazon, one of the world's most biodiverse and ecologically sensitive areas. Among the companies that have already registered for the upcoming auction are CNOOC and Sinopec from China, Chevron and ExxonMobil from the US, Qatar Energy from Europe, BP, Equinor, Shell, Total Energies, and of course Petrobras from Brazil and Ecopetrol from Colombia. Now, at Urgewald, each year we produce the Global Oil and Gas Exit List, which is a company-level database that maps out the expansion plans of oil and gas companies. And our database looks not only at exploration, it also looks at what we call short-term expansion. Now, if you think of the different development stages of an oil and gas exit, after exploration, there's discovery or not. If there's discovery, usually the next stage will be appraisal, where a company determines whether the extraction of the resources is commercially viable. Once the appraisal is positive, then the next two stages are field evaluation and the actual development phase. And field evaluation means that the front-end engineering design plans are developed, that a project development and operation plan gets put in place. And under development is the stage where the actual infrastructure development starts and first drilling of wells. Now, the short-term expansion metric we provide in our database, it gives a measure of which amount of resources a company is planning to bring into production in the near future, which can be a time period depending on how difficult the area is from which the oil or gas will be extracted. It can be a time period of 1 to 5 years. These are projects to which the companies are committed and that they are investing in and planning to bring into production. Now, if you look at Latin America as a whole, 51% of new oil and gas resources under development are in Brazil, host country of COP30. And if we look on a worldwide level, Brazil is the country with the 6th largest short-term expansion plans, right after the US, Russia, and the Gulf states. And in Latin America, the company with the biggest expansion plans is Petrobras, a company whose its business is oil and gas, oil and gas, oil and gas. And 93% of its expansion is unconventional, as it involves ultra deep water drilling. That is drilling at depth beyond 1,500 meters. Now, many of us remember in 2010, the Deepwater Horizon catastrophe, which shows just how challenging drilling at these depths is and how helpless companies are in containing the impacts when something goes wrong. The auction on June 17th is a further milestone in the Brazilian government's plan to make the country the fourth largest oil producer in the world. COP30 is just around the corner. And to quote the former president of IBAMA, Sueli Araujo, you can't really be a climate leader if you're aiming to increase the production of fossil fuels. I'll stop here, and unless there are immediate questions of clarification to me, Nicole Oliveira from Arayara will shine a spotlight on the actual areas, communities, and ecosystems that are at risk if the June 17th auction goes forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Hefa. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to the people in Brazil. I want to first thank deeply Urgewald and the colleagues for organizing this press conference and helping to share what's happening next week in Brazil with the oil auction and in general with the oil expansion. I also have a little presentation. So we are calling it Doomsday Auction because what this auction is posing is really serious and grave for biodiversity, for communities, and for climate. Before really quickly, I want to talk about Arayara. So we have more than 34 years of existence working on energy transition, and we prevented already from our actions 3 carbon bombs, and we work basically with production of technical knowledge, advocacy work, litigation, multi-sectoral mobilization, campaigns, and partnerships like the ones we have with Urgewald. And in 2023, we developed this tool. This link is open and available in English for whoever is interested in joining. And it's showing the impacts or the expansion of fossil fuels in whole South America, including 2,558 blocks that are currently being explored, but 1,800 more that are under study. And Brazil is the lead country in all of them, both in the expansion but also in the current exploration. And Petrobras is the leader company in all of this too. And in 2024, we launched an ocean monitor, and the purpose of this was to cross the data between ocean conservation efforts from the Brazilian government with oil and gas. And very serious numbers we came up when we started the research. And basically 22% of the areas that were supposed to be priority for conservation for ocean biodiversity are overlapping with oil and gas projects. And we analyzed the 2025 auction. This is part of a permanent bidding. So the blocks are constantly in offer. And then once in a while, the government organizes an auction where companies can acquire the concession rights for exploration. And we did a series of analysis. I'm not going to explain all of them, but we looked at how the blocks are overlapping with conservation units, with coral reefs and important ocean environments, traditional communities like indigenous peoples, settlements, and other traditional peoples. And we looked at different other sectors, including climate emissions. Oops, sorry, I think I clicked on the wrong. Yeah. And between 23, that was the first auction during Lula's government that offered 602 new blocks. And this one in 25, there was a gap because the oil agency made a lot of mistakes and errors, both in analyzing technically the environmental impacts of the blocks, but also overlapping offers on top of areas that are forbidden by law, like indigenous communities, for example, like indigenous territories. So this is the auction that will happen next week, June 17th. That's how it looks like. So we have 172 blocks. 88% of those are in offshore and only 12% are onshore. From those, 47 blocks are on the Amazon basin. And this is the same basin where block 59 is. And if you are following the conversations in Brazil, where the heat is between the Minister of Mines and Energy and the Minister of Environment, Marina Silva, and Lula, is exactly about the licensing of this block, because it's the gate entry to the Amazon basin. And it puts at risk the whole Amazon coast. And these blocks, they are problematic in many ways, but the most important legal problem of this auction is that the environmental assessment that is done is not a proper one, because the proper one would be what they call it AAAS in Portuguese. It's the environmental sensitivity study. So basically it looks at the whole region holistically and looks at what are the species that are threatened to extinction, what are the communities that live there and need this area for survival and for their economy, and it looks as of the region as a whole. And this can be replaced by a joint statement by Minister of Mines and Energy and Environment. And this statement has a expiration date of 5 years. And this, the majority of the blocks, including the ones on the Amazon basin, expire on June 18th, which means the day after the auction. And the concession bidding is not over, because it's only over when the company signed the contract. So this poses a huge legal risk for the investors and the companies, because the environmental assessment is not valid throughout the process. And it's very sensitive because the studies are very old. So some of the studies that base these joint statements are from 2005, 6, 8. And the most grave of all of this is that even though there is a joint statement, 45 out of the 47 blocks that are being offered in the Amazon basin have no studies whatsoever. It was never studied before, so we don't know the impact of a possible oil spill, or we don't know the impacts, we don't even know what kind of species are threatened to extinction in this area, because there was never a proper assessment done. And the other issue that we paid a lot of attention was, of course, climate emissions and how much CO2 was involved in this auction. And the Brazilian government and the oil agency, they both have been lacking on transparency and calculating emissions for the whole bidding process in general. In 2023, when the auction happened on the first auction during Lula's government, Arayara did a lawsuit that it's called data production, information production lawsuit. And basically was the court asking the government and the oil agency if they do calculation of emissions and if they have a plan for mitigation and the impacts on the NDC. And they responded in court, they don't do it. So from the 172 blocks, only 40% have estimated reserves. And from these reserves that we know of, so only 70 blocks, is already 544 million tons of CO2. This is 3.5 times higher the annual emissions of the state of São Paulo. And we have a lot of invisible carbon bombs. So only Petrobras, so even we're talking about scope 1 here, but if we would consider scope 3, for example, it's not declared, it's not declared widely, not calculated, because the reserves are not properly estimated. And Petrobras alone in 2023 emitted 445 million tons of CO2. So the justification the government uses is that this is going to be exported, it's going to be burned elsewhere, but it's still a duty of the both government and Petrobras and the oil agency to make the calculations of scope 1, 2, and 3 and figure out how this is going to impact the NDC. So what Arayara did for the auction to try to prevent this from happening is we filed 5 lawsuits against the auction. One is the most obvious one about the joint manifestations, the joint statements, which is the one I just mentioned that expires. There's Noronha is a very important ocean conservation area in Brazil. It's a paradise for whoever likes to dive and likes tourism. And there are blocks that are overlapping on top of seamounts, which are protected by international agreements. There was no consultation for the indigenous people or impacted communities. And we have one lawsuit about emissions and climate risk, asking for the agency to disclose the emissions 48 hours before the bidding. And there's also overlap with conservation units. The Amazon basin, as I mentioned, is the hotspot right now of conflict in the government. And the state attorney of Pará, the state that is going to host COP30, recommended the oil agency to remove the 47 blocks. And the oil agency already said they will not do that. And the calculation we did about the impacted communities is 556,000 people impacted that were not consulted, were not involved in the process. And the majority of those are artisanal fishers, but we also have indigenous lands. And I want to call the attention to the indigenous lands because this is something so serious that it deserves international attention. The areas in yellow, for whoever sees colors, or the areas that are have lines on the diagonal, they are indigenous lands that are recognized by the state as protected area. And the more square or square-shaped ones are the polygonal blocks that are being auctioned. And as you can see, there is indigenous lands that are completely sieged by the blocks. So we, in our lawsuit, we are calling the court to recognize this as the same as an overlap, because it's leaving the communities without an exit. And there's, of course, overlap anyway with buffer zones of these areas. So this is my final point, is summarizing the problems of this auction, and I'm available to answer questions after, but it's the environmental assessment is outdated or not existing, and it is expiring in the middle of the process. We are notifying all the companies that are interested in and subscribed to acquire blocks to let them know about this legal gap. Indigenous lands are under threat. Biodiversity is at risk with a lot of blocks on high important areas for preservation of biodiversity, no consultation of traditional communities, a lot of emissions that are not being accounted for, and there's no plan for mitigation. The coral reefs are at risk, especially the Great Amazon Reef System and Fernando de Noronha, but I also want to mention the one in Pelotas Basin, which is in the south of Brazil. We have a lot of cumulative impact that is not being calculated, and also on artisanal fishers, and recurrent errors from the oil agency itself, which makes the investing not only immoral because of the climate change, but also risky from an investment perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicole and Hefa, for your inputs. We are now going to open up the floor to reporter questions. I see that some of you have already began posting in the chat. This is one way that you can ask your question. Another one is to raise your hand, and we will keep track. And when it's your turn, my colleague Clara is going to unmute you and let you ask your question live. I will start by reading out the reporter questions which have been posted in the chat. And the first one is from Hannah Fernandez from EcoBusiness. Hannah says, good evening. Thanks for this interesting info. Chinese companies Sinopec and CNOOC have been among the winning bidders for the rights to develop oil reserves in Brazil in previous years, and now they are bidding again on June 17th. Any info on how any of their explorations have been going, if they have impacted the environment or indigenous people? CNOOC and Sinopec.
Do you want to collect more questions, or should we answer one by one? How do you prefer to do this?
I think that we should go one by one.
Okay, I'm gonna open here. I hope we can share this. Yeah. So this is the monitor I mentioned, and you can select Sinopec here, and you can see their investments in Brazil. So you can see where they are. So CNOOC is here. So mostly outside the pre-salt area, and they have 2 blocks.
Nicole, I think you're going to have to explain pre-salt.
Sorry, yeah. Pre-salt is a high, ultra deep water area. And it was the picture that Hefa showed with Lula, with his hands filled with oil, are from the discovery of this reserve, which is a massive reserve with really high quality oil, which they call it light oil, that requires a little bit less refining than other heavy oils. And it's deeper than 1,500 meters and more. Sometimes it reaches 2,500 meters, 3,000 meters below sea level. And it has been explored for a long time in Brazil. It has generated a lot of knowledge by Petrobras, especially on the technology of ultra deep waters drilling. Petrobras had for a long time monopoly on the exploration, or at least preference on the exclusivity rights to explore it. And now this is changing bit by bit, but it's 2 years ago and last year, there were more wells discovered there. So one of the things that we have been saying is that pre-salt is still has a lot of reserves, and there's new wells being discovered in this area that has been highly, highly impacted. So I will just show you in the map. Usually I like showing the map because it's, I'm struggling a bit with Zoom, sorry. Second, yeah. So this area here is pre-salt. And as you can see, it's the most dense areas of oil blocks. And what we say is that we don't need to expand the frontier of exploration. This can hold enough resources for us to transition away from fossil fuels without having to drill in the Amazon or in very high sensitive areas, for example. And speaking of companies, on offshore, the company that is like the top explorer is Petrobras, especially because of this rule that they had exclusivity for pre-salt. And then comes Shell and Chevron and Exxon. And then when you go onshore, the situation changes a bit because a new company called Elysian, it's a Brazilian company, acquired in the last auction 122 blocks at once. And they are not being drilled yet, they're still under licensing, and most of the blocks that were acquired in 23 are still under licensing process. And just one more thing about licensing. Block 59 is under license since more than 10 years. So it's a stranded asset. And it's very important to say that whatever company invests in these high sensitive areas will have stranded assets because it's going to be really hard to license them.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for this very clear and very detailed answer. We have one more question in the chat from Amanda Magnani. She asks, have any of the companies that you contacted answered to your warnings? And if so, how have they reacted?
They haven't this year yet. In 23, this was Elysian, this new company that acquired 123 blocks. At the end of the bidding, in the press conference, they said that they didn't acquire blocks on top of traditional communities like quilombolas, who are the people that were enslaved and created these communities in Brazil who are protected by law. They did not acquire these blocks because of our studies. So now we know the companies are assessing our studies, since the oil agency is not giving them enough assurance of problems they might have along the way for licensing. They are also looking at our data, but still, I think the companies should look also at the stranded asset situation.
Thank you, Nicole. Next, we have a live question from Manuel. Please go ahead.
Yes, hello, my name is Manuel from German magazine Energie Zukunft. In the invitation for this meeting I got from Urgewald, there was written that like Raya was successful in the past working against the permission of oil and gas explorations. Maybe you can give me some insights, like, yeah, what happened, how you were successful?
Yes, thank you for this question. So there are two ways that we are successful. One is that the companies do not buy the blocks. So, for example, this case of Elysian, there were other cases. In 23, there were no blocks in the equatorial margin being offered because of the questioning that we've been asking. The second way that we were successful is that between 23 and 25, a lot of the blocks got reshaped and cut out conservation units, traditional communities. So a lot of things that we've been pointing out were cut out from the bidding and from the offering, which is a partial success because the oil is still being offered to be drilled and burned and emitted, but at least it's a little bit less harmful to the environment. But the third one is in the lawsuits. So one of them was about consultation. So whenever we question the oil agency about consultation for indigenous communities, they say that this is not their prerogative, and this should be done during the environmental licensing processes with the environmental agency. And we got a court decision that canceled the concession, prohibited the new concessions of blocks in indigenous lands, and affirmed that the oil agency does need to do consultation before even offering the blocks. And this is very meaningful because now this decision went to the tribunal sustained the decision, so it's consolidated. And this can mean for other agencies like the mining agency, and before granting mining concession rights to somebody near indigenous land, they need to consult previously. So this was very significant for us. And we had other decisions that had statements in favor by, for example, the state attorney side of the lawsuit, but then it took so long that either the block was not acquired or something like that. And then in 23, we litigated 77 blocks. And from the 77 that we litigated, only 6 were bought. So the companies do not want to take the risk of buying a concession that is being litigated.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. The next question from the chat is from Martina. She asks, are some of the Elysian blocks in the Amazon?
They are all, I will show you while I answer. So they are in the coast, mostly in Rio Grande do Norte. And this has a big, heavy expansion and exploration, as you can see. And there's 44 blocks that are on this area here. But most of their blocks acquired were in Rio Grande do Norte and in the Northeast, so Sergipe and Bahia. And the Bahia case and the Maranhão case, which Rio Grande do Norte and a little bit further up, so these blocks here, Maranhão, which were not acquired by Elysium, but I just want to also make a comment. They are blocks that have a reserve for fracking. And even though we have been stopping fracking from our campaigning work and approving legislation that prohibits fracking in the states and in the cities, as you can see, the purple one is the unconventional reserve. So this is where fracking gas could be explored, and that's exactly where they bought the blocks.
Thank you, Nicole. The next question from the chat comes from Constance, and it goes like this. Hi there. It is extremely unlikely that AMP will suspend next week's auction. What does Arayara hope to achieve with the lawsuits? Have you been successful in hindering auctions, licensing of oil exploration in the past? You partially answered this already, but perhaps you can repeat what you hope to achieve with this current litigation again.
Thank you. Yeah, so there is a chance that we get there's a good chance that we get a court order, if not before the auction happen, after the auction happen, about the environmental state assessments that are expiring, because there's already understanding from the Supreme Courts that the bidding process ends when the contract is signed, and for this bidding the contract is signed only in October. So they are gonna sign a contract with a non-existing environmental base. So this is really risky, and we hope that we get a court decision backing this up. And since the state attorney had recommended them to remove the 47 blocks from the Amazon basin, and they haven't done so, there's also a good chance that these blocks are removed by a court decision.
Thank you, Nicole. Next, we have one more question by Amanda. She asks, can you please tell us a bit more about the other blocks? In an interview with Sueli Araujo, she mentioned to me that we should also pay close attention to the blocks in the south of Brazil. I would like to know more about that. And also, are there fracking blocks in this year's auction? Two-part question.
Thank you. Yeah, I took the fracking slides out, but I'm pulling them even if they're in Portuguese to show you. In the meantime, I can talk about Pelotas base. So let me open it here. A second. Yeah. Okay. So Pelotas is this basin here, and in the south, so here's Uruguay already. This is Rio Grande do Sul and Santa Catarina and Paraná. And I can pull in the layer. And that's the fun thing about this tool, is that you can play with it as you wish. And this is the plan. Well, Pancorais is the plan for coral reef protection. So as you can see, there are so many blocks that are exactly on top of the coral reefs in the south. And this here is a region that is really important for, there's for many things it's important. So one of them is that there's a protected area called Apa-Baleia Franca. So it's the right whale conservation unit. So the green ones are the conservation units. And there are blocks that are overlapping with the coral reef protection area. And with the whales, it's very important right here in Bituba. So this whole area here, the green area, is for the reproduction of the right whale. And whales, they guide themselves through sonar, exactly like dolphins and other sea mammals. And not just because of the boats that are circling for serving the platforms, but also the seismic testing that is done for oil exploration really damages their ability to locate themselves and to find their ways. So sometimes they can get lost and they can not find their food or mates. And also in further to the south, it's a coral reef platform. And this is where the whole fishes and sea animals reproduce. And this, especially in Santa Catarina, it's very, very important for the commercial fishing industry. And it moves billions of dollars a year in export of fishing. And this is going to impact an economy that is really important for the state and for the South. So not only biodiversity, but also for fishing. And about fracking. Alison, can you help me out a little bit, please, and send me the link with the fracking slides? Because I'm only finding the English one. Found it. Okay. Second, where's the fracking? Yeah. I don't know if this is going to make any sense to you because it's in Portuguese, but I'll try to do my best to not bore you, but show you a little bit. So what we've been saying, and I can also show on the map where the fracking is, but there is many blocks that overlap unconventional reserve areas. And we also cross these blocks with the use of this land. So the light pink one is the one where they produce soy. And we all know that nobody wants to import soy from a region that has fracking. So we have been campaigning in these regions with the soy producers to prevent fracking from happening and from taking place. And we've been successful in this campaign, and we approved more than 450 laws in municipalities. We have changed constitution of 2 states. There's 5 more states of Brazil discussing a ban on fracking because of the fracking impacts on commercial activities like beverage producing and soy producing and other commercial activities.
Thank you very much, Nicole. We have one more important question in the chat, namely on Tuesday, where can we follow how the auction is going?
Yeah, we have a website and we have a team of georeference experts, including Alison, who's here. And I don't know if Georgie is here too or Dani, but we have a lot of people that will be there on the site. And we are doing real-time analysis, and we posted on a website called, I will write it here. So this is the link where we do the assessment real time, and then you can see where the blocks were auctioned, what are the communities that risk, all this assessment that we did about conservation unit, indigenous land, fracking. So this is all going to be available real time.
Thank you very much, Nicole. We'll be watching for sure. The next question in the chat comes from Nina, and she's asking, how do you think this auction will affect Brazil's role in environmental protection with COP30 in Belém coming up?
Thank you for this question. Maybe Hefa can also speak about it. It's very tricky because Brazil is playing a world leader in climate action and was one of the first countries to submit the NDC. Lula just came to Nice, where I am actually right now, and talked about oil and gas and ocean conservation. And at the same time is not just auctioning a massive expansion of the frontier of oil and gas, but is also pressuring the environmental agency to license blocks in very sensitive areas where we don't have enough data and information about the risks that this poses. So the pressure is coming from the governor of Pará, for example, of Barbalho, where the COP is going to be hosted, and is also coming from the governor of Amapá. And with a narrative of development, which is, we call it the mermaid singing, which is sounds great, but it's actually not really true. And the good example that we have is Rio de Janeiro, that has been exploring oil for almost 40 years. And it should be Norway from all the oil. So we should have a sovereign fund. We should have great education, great system of health. Everyone should be really rich. We should have a good welfare state, and we don't have. And more than half of the population is living below poverty level. The last 6 governors of Rio were arrested for or investigated for corruption. So it's a very good example of how it's a mermaid singing and it's not real. But maybe Hefa, would you like to say more about COP and?
Well, I mean, since Orgavolt is based in Europe, we of course find it interesting the role that European oil and gas companies are playing, like Equinor, Total Energies, BP, and Shell, in terms of opening up new oil and gas frontiers. And I mean, it's these companies are incredibly powerful players, and they're exerting their influence not only in Brazil but all through Latin America, actually all through any place where there's oil and gas. And yeah, I really wonder. I mean, this is the I think the 3rd time in a row that a COP is being held in a petro state, or even the 4th time in a row. And of course, we're looking already at last year's COP. Civil society organizations were saying, the oil and gas company executives are one of the biggest delegations. And the question is really how this will play out at this COP. I'd be interested, if I can ask a question myself of you, Nicole, is, the typical argument is always that comes, and you already sort of alluded to that before, but, this is needed for Brazil's development. I mean, that's the argument that Lula himself makes, we'll, develop all this oil and gas, but we'll do it to, raise the living standards and bring Brazilians out of poverty. Like, what's your response to that? How well has that worked up to now?
Yeah, so pre-salt, when pre-salt, the ultra deep waters reserve started being explored, Lula promised to create a sovereign fund that would fund education and health. And it never happened, so this fund doesn't exist. And the money got lost in corruption, and it didn't really get converted into good development. There is a city that I like to use as an example, even more granular than the state of Rio. It's called Macaé. And Macaé used to be nicknamed the Princess of the Atlantic. It's this beautiful city by the coast with mountains, and used to have Atlantic forest very well preserved. And after 40 years, it became the capital of oil drilling. It has now they're building gas, like LNG hubs. So there's an LNG harbor, and they're building 14 gas power plants in the city. And they want to distribute the gas both from pre-salt, but also from the importation, because the plan is to eventually convert the LNG import terminal to an export terminal. And the school of the city is nicknamed after a prison, Carandiru. Some of you might have seen the movie Carandiru. And it's because the school is so bad and it's so ugly and it has bars on the windows. There is 40,000 people living below poverty level. There's no water for the population. The city is all contaminated. And imagine 40 years getting royalties from oil, and they don't have one hospital that has reference for cancer treatment. People have to move to a different city to treat for cancer that is being caused by oil drilling themselves. So we shouldn't use this narrative. And besides that, we did a study about the impacts of oil in fishing reserves. And the oil platforms, they create an exclusion zone around them, and the fishing boats cannot reach the platforms. And some types of fish, like some types of tuna, has 64% of the area. And it's not just, I'm not talking about area in square meters, I'm talking about hours of efforts of fishing that are dedicated in that place, reduced by the platforms if they are all built. And if you look at the map of Brazil, the whole coast is being either auctioned right now, was already concessioned, or is being studied to be concessioned. So of course, this will impact the economy of fishing, the economy of tourism at the beaches. We saw what happened 5 years ago when the oil spill covered more than 100 beaches of Brazil, and tourism really dropped. A lot of people didn't have a livelihood. So this impacts local economy. And of course, we have to talk about climate impact and how much this impacts the economy as well. And all these carbon bombs that are being burned and explored, what will happen to, who will fund the rebuilding and the adaptation of the cities, and all of the impacts that are reaching the whole country.
Thank you very much, Hefe and Nicole. Next, we have two campaign-related questions from Constance. Why did you opt to call the auction Doomsday Auction? What are you trying to convey with that name? And are protests planned to take place during the auction next week?
Yes, there are protests. So there is a lot of people traveling to Rio, and people from Rio that will demonstrate on that day. There's indigenous communities, there's fishing communities, activists, climate activists, youth, activists. So there's a lot of people gathering in Rio to demonstrate against the oil auction. We do this every year. We usually try to get a meeting with the head of the oil agency and the traditional communities so they can hear out the voices of the people in the territories that will be impacted. We support people from territories that have blocks being offered to come and have their voices heard. And it's going to happen on the 17th of June in Rio. We are still trying to confirm the location because the oil agency is not disclosing to prevent people from demonstrating, which is super strange because during Bolsonaro government, we demonstrated, and the admiral who was the head of the oil agency during Bolsonaro's mandate, met with Arayara twice. And we were peacefully demonstrating. The police was there just to kind of support us and keep us safe. You know, it was the dialogue was better. And now during Lula's government, we are getting much harder times to get dialogue. The agency already announced there will be heavy policing to, I don't know, maybe repress the demonstration, but we will not be intimidated because it's really important to shout out what's happening. And I forgot the first question, sorry. I got so excited about the demonstration.
The first one was about the name which you gave to this auction. Why is this the, yes, why is this the Doomsday auction?
So the 23 was already, we call Doomsday because of the climate potential for 602 blocks and the impact this would have on the world. And the idea is to highlight that even, and to also counter narrative, this thing the oil agency is saying, oh yeah, but the oil is going to be burnt elsewhere. It's not impacting Brazilian NDC. And the idea is to say, if we keep burning oil, the planet will suffer. And we already know the IPCC and the International Energy Agency already said that to contain climate, the temperature rise to 1.5, maximum 2 degrees, we cannot keep drilling new wells, and especially not in this proportion of 602, 172, and every year or every other year is a massive, massive expansion. So, you know, 3.5 times the size of the state of Rio de Janeiro is being auctioned. It's the size of the country of France is being auctioned at once. So this is really, if this is not the doomsday, I don't know what is.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Are there any other questions? I don't see any. I also don't see any hands up in the air. So I think that we can wrap up. Thank you very much to Hefa and to Nicole.
Maybe just one more
Hefa, would you like to-
announcement, Ognian. I just wanted to give a heads up that Arayara and Urgewald were preparing a detailed report on fossil fuel expansion in all of Latin America, mapping out who are the main companies, but also who are the main financiers behind these companies. And this report will be published in early September. And yeah, in English first, and then for the COP itself in Spanish and Portuguese. And I think this could also be of interest to everyone who's been in this press conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hefa. I will personally make sure that each and every one of you hears about that as soon as we are ready to go. And as it has been mentioned already, we are going to make the recording of today's presentations and question and answer session available to you all shortly. And if you have any further questions, do not hesitate to reach out to me, and I'm going to make sure that we provide you with all of the answers which you need from us and which we can give over to you. Thank you very much for your active participation, for your attention, and for your ongoing coverage of this important topic, and we will stay in touch.